Okay, welcome to another episode of the Helpside Basketball Show. Today we have the man, the myth, the legend, Steve Coach K Konchalski. We're going to go through some questions. We got a lot of stuff to cover, and we're going to get right into it. Is that okay?
All right, well, I'm excited. Thanks for having me on, Merrick. And we go back a number of years, and we've had a great relationship over a long period of time. So we got some catching up to do, and I'm looking forward to
Absolutely. Okay, so you're originally from Queens, New York, Amherst to be
it.
exact, and you played your high school ball at Archbishop Malloy, and that's the same high school as Kenny the Jet Smith on ESPN. Kenny Anderson, another NBA great back in the day. How did you get from Queens, New York to Wolfville, Nova Scotia at Acadia University?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, every kid growing up in New York or in the States, they want a scholarship. And I can't say that's probably the case in Canada right now, too. They want to get a scholarship.
Mhm.
Um, and I wasn't. I didn't get a lot of playing time. And I was a young, undeveloped player. I didn't graduate from high school. My whole senior year of high school, I was 16 years old.
Wow.
So I was young. I was still developing my game, and I didn't get an opportunity to get on the floor a lot. My scholarships were few and far between. I had some, small offers to junior colleges out in the Midwest or whatever,
Mhm.
but I wanted to go to 4-year school because I didn't want to switch schools halfway through.
Mhm.
Unlike 99% of the population today, where the portal and everything. I wanted to go somewhere where I was going to be there for 4 years, play for the same coach for 4 years, uh, play with my teammates, grow and develop with my teammates. And I
Mhm.
wanted it to be a small school where I could, you know, feel comfortable and focus on my academics too, because
Right.
I was a good student and had some academic goals as well as basketball goals. So nothing was coming up in the States, even
Mhm.
though Coach Jack Curran, uh, our head coach at Malloy, was a legendary coach.
Mhm.
He won over 900 games as a basketball coach and over 1,700 games as a baseball coach.
Wow.
He had connections, but one of his connections was a gentleman by the name of Stu Aberdeen, and Stu Aberdeen coached at Acadia University, and he came down. I think they met. They might have met at Camp All America, which was I think on the West Point campus, and he came down to New York in the spring of my senior year, and Coach Curran set up a tryout for about 20 players from not just from Malloy, but from other schools in the city as well.
Mhm.
And so Coach Aberdeen saw me play. He liked what he saw. I mean, I was a shooter. I wasn't, I could touch the rim, but that was about it. Uh, but I could shoot the ball. And he came and visited my parents, and I still wasn't sold on coming to another country. I mean,
Right.
the world was pretty small in those days. I had to actually look on the map to see where Nova Scotia was. And so I actually wrote him a letter. In those days, there was no social media or um, emails or whatever. So I wrote him a letter saying, "Coach, thanks very much, but I'm not going to, I'm not going to attend Acadia." Anyway, he wouldn't take no for an answer. Thank goodness. And he came back down to New York again and met with my parents.
Wow.
And that kind of did it. And I ended up with another player from Bishop Lachlan, who I knew. Bishop Lachlan is another legendary school. And, had Mark Jackson, for instance, one of their grads. We ended up coming up to Acadia, and it checked off all the boxes except I didn't expect to come to another country.
So you played a key role while you're at Acadia, and you actually brought them a national championship in 1965. So, and you were named tournament all-star and tournament MVP. What was your assessment of playing what was your assessment of the level of play in Canada?
Well, I wasn't that good. Uh, to be perfectly honest with you, I had to work on my game. Um, and basically, the Canadian players weren't that anywhere near what we're dreaming about today. There's so many players in the country right now that's incredible.
Mhm,
I feel blessed to be part of that, uh, you know, group of players back in the 1960s that helped, develop the game in our country, and the opportunity to work with the national team program and work with these great players. But
mhm.
the presence in the national championship game that you mentioned, the year we won the national championship, 1965, uh, the our whole starting five at Acadia were Americans,
Wow.
and
That's cheating, coach.
it is now because and then the team we were playing against was the University of Windsor,
Oh,
and they had four Americans in their starting lineup,
wow.
and the fifth uh, player was from Windsor, which was right across the bridge from the states.
Yes.
So the Americans came up and led the way basically, and I think developed the game, helped develop the game
Mhm,
in Canada, and then they eventually, I think it was early '70s, put in the rule you could only have three international players. And at the time, I mean, I was finished my eligibility by then, so it didn't affect me, but uh, it affected my coaching in my
mhm,
early years,
mhm.
because I could have brought up a carload of Americans, to come up, but at the same time, it was the right thing to do. And it really did develop Canadian basketball, similar to what the CEBL does right now, where they say you have to have so many Canadians, and they have to have two
Mhm,
Canadians on the court at all times.
mhm.
So at the time, I didn't like it. It certainly was beneficial to Canadian basketball.
Right. And then after graduating from Acadia, you went to Dal Law School and then back to Acadia to coach for a little bit, for I think a year. And then you spent 4 years at Loyola College in Montreal, which eventually turned into Concordia University. Then in 1975, you became the head coach of St. FX. Were were there people back in the East Coast that were pulling for you to come back to to the East Coast? Or how did you go about getting that head coach position?
Well, my heart was pulling me back. I really fell in love with living in Nova Scotia, and being in Montreal, and we had some good teams at Loyola. We went to the Nationals a couple of times.
Mhm,
Never won them, but we're competitive with the best teams there. But I opened up the Montreal Gazette, or the Montreal Star, or whatever newspaper it was, and I opened up the first page of sports, and it would be hockey. And I opened up the second page of sports,
more
and
hockey.
it'd be hockey. And I get to the third page, and they'd start maybe having a couple. They'd have maybe some basketball scores if you could
Mhm,
find them. And every time, every 2, 3 weeks, they might have an article. But
mhm.
in the East Coast, with no professional teams to compete for the headlines, and you know this yourself, Americans, somebody that played down there. The newspapers covered college sports was the number one,
Yeah.
spectator.
Wall to wall, wall to wall.
Exactly, and the fans, they packed the gyms. The Halifax Metro Center at the time, now called the Scotiabank Center, regular crowd for a playoff game would be 5,000,
That's right.
and this wasn't happening in
Mon
probably anywhere else in Canada. So that's where I wanted to coach. I wanted to coach where there was excitement, where the fans got packed the stands, where when you walk across campus, I could tell my recruits when you guys walk across campus, everybody's gonna know who you are,
Mhm.
and everybody's gonna be talking about the game that you played last night or the
Mm.
game coming up next week.
Mhm.
And that's the excitement that I wanted to coach in that environment. What people don't know is that I was actually offered the UPEI job
Mhm.
the year before I accepted the St. FX job.
Wow.
And I came very close to going to UPEI, but at that time, they didn't have they had a little bandbox gym,
Mhm.
and you had to take a ferry boat,
To get
to
there.
get there. And I just
Mhm.
felt that that was going to be detrimental. It'd be hard to recruit around that,
Mhm.
um, and I held off for a year, and St. FX showed up, and that's the
And the rest is history.
that's the rest of history. Yeah.
And so, I mean, talking about history, you had a historic run at St. FX, racking up 919 wins, most ever by a U Sport coach, national titles in 93, 2000, 2001. Before winning your first championship in 93, you had some tremendous success. I remember stepping on campus and hearing about the stories about, Augie Jones and John Hatch and all these like crazy players. And I felt a lot of pressure because I was like, I can't live up to these names. Like these guys had some 20 plus win seasons and and you never won it. You never won you never won the big title. What was the difference between that 93 team compared to all the powerhouse teams you had leading up to that?
Well, first of all, my goal when I took over the program at St. FX was to consistently put teams on the floor that were going to compete for the championships.
Mhm.
And when I retired, people, 5 years ago, people wanted to talk about the championship teams, and and deservedly so. But at the same time, my goal was to put a team on the floor every year that had a chance to win.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm most proud of in terms of, the 900 some odd wins to average over 20 wins a year for 46 years. To make the playoffs, some teams, say, yeah, we're going to fight to make the playoffs. We made the playoffs 38 straight years.
Wow.
And those are the things I'm the most proud of when I look back at the consistency of the program. But
Mhm.
to answer your question specifically, yeah, we came close 3 or 4 times before your championship team in 1993. I'd say the difference was a couple of things. One was luck, and then luck in the sense of injuries, staying
Mm.
healthy. And the other years we were in the championships, every year we had a significant injury
Mhm.
that affected the chemistry and the quality of the starting five, or maybe the first couple of guys off the bench, whatever.
Mhm.
That'd be number one, because we stayed healthy, we stayed injury free in '93,
Mhm.
at least down the stretch,
Right.
and that'd be number one. And number two, we had the guy in the middle. We had Rashad Bella, and we used him. I remember the next year after Rashad went to Italy to play professional basketball. I had some players, not you, but I had some players come up to me and say, "Coach, I can't get my shot off." I said, "Yeah, okay, yeah." The reason why was because there were two guys guarding Bella, and some of the players, some of our guys coming off the bench or whatever, they weren't, they had open looks. And
Yes.
then all of a sudden now that changes, and now you got to go create your own shot, or with either individual play or ball movement, preferably.
Yes. Yes.
And that was the difference. And I still think I know the game has changed, and everybody's probably telling me, "Oh, yeah, listen to this and say, oh yeah, you're old school." But you know what? There's still a place for an inside game, even with the 3-point shot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you talked about the changing of the game, and in your opinion, how has the Canadian university game changed or evolved since the '80s, '90s, and now in today's game as it relates to style of play and culture?
Well, first of all, the game has changed. The style of play goes along with how the game is being played. With all the analytics and play behind the 3-point line, and um, that's changed. I think the Toronto Raptors changed the culture, starting in the GTA, of course, because it's just the population, and immigration. The jump in immigrants coming to Canada and
Mhm.
specifically Toronto area, and at the same time coincided with the Raptors coming to Canada. Vince Carter, capturing the imagination of every kid, coast to coast. Um, that changed everything. I was telling Leo Routins the other day, when he was at Syracuse, everybody was saying, "Geez, Syracuse has a Canadian." And now, if you don't have a Canadian, they say, "What's the matter? Well, you're a D1 school. You don't have a Canadian. You're not doing your job." Just so many players. It's just so many players. And I'm proud to be part of that building process from my college days to my national team days.
And you talk about building up of these players. You're now almost, I mean, you've been giving back for many, many years, but you're still now specifically giving back to, as you mentioned, the Calgary Surge before we went on air. Your role with these young these young men now, does your kind of philosophy still resonate with them as it did with our guys back in the day? Or do you have to adjust how you speak or how direct or mentor these kind of guys?
Well, you adjust to who you're coaching. And one of the reasons why, well, first of all, I knew after 46 years at St. X that uh, I'm a lifer. I wasn't going to give up. I just didn't know what my next step was.
Mhm,
And I had coached, college all those years, and then 30 years with the national team program. And I want to work with the pros.
mhm,
And my role is as an advisor. So I go to all the coaches' meetings. I go to all the practices, but I'm not on the court. I'm
mhm,
observing. I make comments to uh, the coaches before and after practice, and I make comments to the players. And the players see me, and they see the role that I have, and and they'll come up to me after practice and they'll say, "Coach, what do you think about this? What do I have to work on?
mhm,
And those type of things." And uh, that's where my role is now in the game
mhm,
is to uh, give back to the game that way. 12 years with the national team as a mentor coach. I
mhm,
had the pleasure to work with with RJ Barrett, SGA, Dylan Brooks, Andrew Wiggins, Andrew Demhar. Well, I had a chance, opportunity to work with these young men as
mhm.
16, 17-year-olds. I wasn't on the court with them, but I was there behind them, and giving the coaches feedback and giving them feedback, and that's what I'm doing. These days is giving back to the game, continuing to stay involved in the game that I love.
So you were behind these young men, but who was behind you as a coach? Who was some of your mentors?
I would say 3 or 4 people. Because they say it takes a village, right? So, um, my high school coach, Jack Curran, legendary coach at Archbishop Malloy, um, passed away, I think, about 12 years ago. He had a lot to do with my development, but at the same time, I didn't appreciate it. And the reason why I didn't appreciate it was I didn't appreciate sitting on the bench, you know, and and he didn't give me the opportunity that I thought I was ready for. But in the long run, he did give me the opportunity because he connected me to Canada, he connected me to Stu Aberdeen at Acadia. It changed my whole life. I mean, if I would have stayed in the States and gone to some JUCO, would I have had a chance to coach the national team for 30 years, go to 3 Olympic Games, win national championships? So he changed my life, even though, like I said, I didn't necessarily recognize it at the time.
Mhm.
And then it would be Stu Aberdeen, who recruited me to Acadia. My 4 years at Acadia, we lost 2 games in our league.
Wow.
And in the Atlantic Conference, we lost 2 games.
Wow.
Uh, and then we went to the Nationals every year. We finished 1 year we won it, as you mentioned, and then the other 3 years we finished second, third, and fourth.
Mhm.
And then the year after I graduated, he went down to the University of Tennessee as the associate head coach, and with my brother's help, recruited Bernard King and Ernie Brumfeld. He was a tremendous coach that motivated anybody. Certainly Jack Donahue, a legendary national team coach,
Mhm.
uh, who took me under his wing, coached at Powell Memorial High School, coached Lou Cinder before he became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Mhm.
As Coach Donahue used to say, I coached both of them. So um, they won 71 straight games. Most people regard that as the greatest high school team ever assembled.
Mhm.
And then he came to Canada and turned basketball upside down, inside out.
Wow.
We went from nothing to going to the Olympics and finishing fourth twice. The 1984 Olympics, we played the U.S. 2 times. They had Patrick Ewing, a guy named Michael Jordan. They had Chris Mullen. They had those guys. And for me they had the honor to coach against those teams in terms of my coaching development.
Mhm.
And then the last mentor I would have to say would be Father George Keogh, who was the
Mhm.
athletic director at St. Francis Xavier, who hired me.
Right.
And when I had my interview to be hired, they started talking to me about, and he was on the interview. He didn't say a word.
Mm.
And when they started talking to me about, well, we need you in addition to coaching, we need you to teach this course and teach this course and everything. And I said, well, look, I'll teach whatever you want me to do, but if you're looking for a teacher, then go find somebody else. But if you want a basketball coach, I'm available.
You guy.
And Father Keogh said, first words that came out of his mouth, he said, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. So, and he taught me about the fact that my greatest success as a coach will not be winning championships, but will be watching young men such as yourself get up on that stage, they get their degree, and go
Mhm.
on and have successful lives. So I'm blessed to have had those type of people behind me.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And what is it about Steve Konchalski that, as a person, that makes him so successful as a basketball coach?
Well, I would say the most important thing I ever learned from any of those mentors was Jack Donahue told me, and he preached it, he believed it, he lived it. He said, coach people, not players.
Mhm.
So, in other words, I'm not coaching a guy to make him a better jump shooter.
Mhm.
I'm going to coach a person who has feelings, who has goals, who has parents that are supportive of him, and their expectations are that they want their son to go to a school where they're going to get their degree, where they're
Mhm.
going to be taught the right way to live their life.
Mhm.
And that's the biggest thing I think. I try to live, try to live by that. Players want a coach that cares, and you can't fake it.
Right.
You can't fake it. You have to be real, and show an interest in your players' personal development, their academics, helping them achieve their goals,
Mhm.
not just on the basketball court. And I think if you do that, you can establish that kind of a relationship. And the other word that really resonates with me is the word loyalty, which I just don't think is lived in this day and age,
Mhm.
the way it was lived. I think you have to be loyal to your players if you expect them to be loyal, to be loyal to you. I just
Mhm.
remember the last one of the last games I coached was actually up in Cape Breton,
Mhm.
the site of many hard fought battles. And a media person, a young woman, came up to me and with a camera and a microphone, and she said, "How would you like to be remembered as a coach?" And I said, "I'd like to be remembered as a person that cared about his players."
Mhm.
And that's the bottom line. And I think if I, as a coach, was able to do that, then it's reciprocal as well. Uh, players will buy into what I'm trying to sell, so to speak,
Mhm.
and we'll both achieve our goals.
Yeah, I mean, like you speaking on these stories and what you said to that reporter, I know I'm a byproduct of that, and I think that was one of the reasons why I chose to go to Saint FX, and it wasn't because of the hype, the VHS tapes that you gave me with all the packed crowds at the Olsen Center and Richie Bella tearing down the rim. Like it wasn't really about that. It was because you made an impact on me and my mom. And so if my mom said, "Seems like a nice guy," and that was pretty much it for me. So she wanted me to be around nice people, and I think, my 4 years at Saint FX, I mean, it was awesome. I don't wanna talk about myself because 'cause I'm gonna get emotional, but I wanna thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a mentor to me and and my family as well, and everything that you've poured into the Saint FX program, all the players that's gone through Saint FX. I was trying to do a calculation of how many players you've actually coached during your 46-year tenure. I actually had to ask ChatGPT, and it couldn't give me an accurate number. It was around 200. So I don't know how close that is, but that's a crazy number of how many players you've impacted over your tenure. So, on behalf of them, I want to thank you for everything that you've done for the program. And I mean, you've heard everything under the sun, all the thank yous and all the awards and all the Hall of Fame accolades. I'm just gonna do my little piece and say thank you again, for coming on the show, number 1, and number 2, for just being who you are. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, American. I'm proud of what you're doing. You're impacting kids just the way I would like to think I did. And you're making your mark, and you're doing it through the game that we both love. So keep it up.
Thank you so much, coach. So thanks for coming on. I know you were kind of tight for time, but thanks for making it happen, and, tell Charlene and the kids I said hello.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.